Could the Shibuya Incident stop Yujiro Hanma? No, I didn't misspeak. Yujiro Hanma is regarded as the strongest thing in existence in Baki's verse. But if we put him in JJK, could he fend off the supernatural threats there, specifically the Shibuya Incident? Assuming the Ogre's working on the protagonist side, of course he can. It might actually be a little bit unfair. So here's the scenario. Let's say one of the many governments that knows Yujiro catches wind of the Shibuya Incident. In order to protect their interest and not cause a world economic disaster, of course they want to stop the Shibuya Incident. So they pull out their strongest weapon, Yujiro Hanma. With Yujiro also convinced that this could be an interesting battle for him. This video also won't contain manga spoilers, by the way, for either series. Since we're just focused on Shibuya, it's only going to cover what's been shown in the JJK anime so far. Same for Baki too. The farthest we'll go is covering some non-spoiler statements if necessary, but even then, that's probably not going to happen. No need to worry about plot spoilers. Also, as a quick disclaimer, I'm aware that Baki's scaling is somewhat inconsistent because there's plenty of statements or feats that are countered by anti-feats, and there's multiple cases of this for speed, attack power, durability, things like that. Also, the opposite, where characters are hyped up beyond where they are. It's especially an issue when Baki is known for notoriously bad fan scans. It is really hard to find a good and accurate translation for the manga. Just like the JoJo Jujutsu Kaisen videos I did, this one's more meant for fun than 100% accuracy. Of course, we're going to aim for accuracy, but keep that all in mind. It won't be in-depth scaling of Yujiro. Basically, just looking at the traits from him that apply to JJK instead. So first, let's start with Yujiro's strength. He's consistently stated to be stronger than any man-made weapon, which means he'd scale beyond the best nuclear devices. This is stated not only by the fake President Obama in the series, but Itagaki too, the author. So we have Word of God and, I guess, Word of Obama. Just as two examples. Fake Obama says his power exceeds that of a nuclear impact, which is a pretty wide range of power. We also have another panel saying that the strongest weapons of an entire nation can't match up to his brute strength. And then another statement saying that he's far above all weapons. As far as we know, the strongest man-made weapon in history is the Sarbamba. There's probably some super secret device out there that we don't know about. Maybe even stronger than this, but this is what we know of. Which is pretty terrifying because this is already pretty powerful. It's a nuclear weapon that's created the most powerful man-made explosion in history, with a yield of 58 megatons. That's 10 times stronger than all the explosives in World War II combined. And to make it more terrifying, it's over 1,500 times as powerful as the combined power of the nukes Little Boy and Fat Man, the two that were used at the end of World War II. And that's not the full extent of its power either. The craziest part is, the original design for this bomb is nearly twice as powerful as that, and its power was limited so the test didn't produce too much fallout. Plus, this was in 1960, so who knows what the theoretical upper limits of nukes are now that we're 60 years ahead of that, and we don't know what secret projects are in store. The only reason I keep mentioning that is because world leaders keep bringing up the fact that he's stronger than any weapon, and they know every weapon. Point being, it might be a lowball to say that he's only stronger than the Sarbamba. This statement's fairly consistent, and it's said a few times in different ways that Yujiro outclasses any military or weapon, so it could effectively scale Yujiro's attack power to mountain level at minimum, which could fodderize most JJK characters, in terms of destructive force and durability that is. And again, this is a fairly conservative estimate in my opinion. You could easily rank Yujiro higher than this. That said, it's also been stated that special grades can take over countries and survive cluster bombs, but there's a difference between that and being directly and overtly stated as being the strongest weapon in existence. He also has some other pretty crazy feats too. He can stop an earthquake with one hand. He's stronger than someone able to exert 100 tons of pressure with one hand. He made a skyscraper shake just by getting angry. As for speed, Yujiro's been stated to be able to dodge lightning. Not that he would need to because he's tanked lightning before. But this is important because if he truly is faster than lightning, that alone places him at the level of speed of the JJK top tiers. He's been shown to move faster than the human eye multiple times to the point where it looks like he's teleporting. We could say he's massively hypersonic. Same for his attacks too because he scales above other characters in the series, notably Katsumi Orochi, who has an attack that moves at 1,000 miles per minute. His casual movement alone is beyond human perception basically. And by the way, this is all without considering the fact that he has the demon back too, which if you're not familiar with Baki, in simple terms this basically increases every stat he has. It's like his own Kaioken. As for durability, it's a little bit harder to scale, but it should be relative to his attack power. Again, there are some anti-feats in Baki that go against this, but still reasonable to assume that his durability is the same as his attack power. Now onto his abilities too. I initially wanted to do this kind of as a regular versus battle matchup, but you guys seem to really like what I did with the JoJo videos where I adapted the characters into the verse with equivalent powers, so we could do that here for fun. And just like those videos, be sure to drop a like on this video too if you want to see more of this format. It tells me you guys are enjoying this. Subscribe too while you're at it. I've got some fun ones coming up. Yujiro's lifestyle and demonic nature likely give him an innately huge amount of cursed energy to begin with. Yujiro is a master martial artist who can manipulate ki and other energy. Remember I mentioned he shook a skyscraper by being angry? That's one example. He could project his energy. So by default, he probably would be able to tap into cursed energy as well. And if not, the second he fights someone with cursed energy, he's so adaptable to the point that he can copy things on the fly. He'd probably be able to replicate cursed energy control somehow, which would further buff him. And remember, cursed energy can also boost your durability by reinforcing yourself, and can empower attacks. Yujiro's base strength, even without the demon back, it surpasses pretty much everyone in the JJK verse already, with a few exceptions. Like, he's not perfect sphere level. But combine that with him fortifying himself with an amount of cursed energy that arguably surpasses everyone besides maybe Yuta, Gojo, and Sukuna, and he's devastating. And given where cursed energy stems from and how Yujiro might have so much by default, he could even surpass those three, hypothetically at least. Given how fast he can master things as well, who's to say he can't get a domain on the fly too? So with that in mind, I realized he'd probably be way too overpowered if we did what we did in the JoJo video. Giving him cursed energy is enough of a buff on its own, especially if you gave him a domain. But I think there's something in this verse that's probably really fitting for him. Instead of giving him a cursed technique and a domain, if we had a JJK version of Yujiro, what if we were instead to give him a heavenly restriction like Toji or Maki, one that trades off cursed energy in general for peak power? And given the hypothetical amount of cursed energy he'd have to begin with, that would be a pretty lopsided trade. And we could say he also has access to the demon back. Even removing all his cursed energy kind of buffs him in a way, because that would mean he's immune to almost every domain, besides Sukuna's, since domains need to target cursed energy. And with this, we could also fit him into the verse without needing a way to adjust his abilities and such. I also think this is pretty fitting for him, relying on his actual strength rather than cursed energy. But comment below what you think though, if you have any sort of idea for a unique cursed technique that fits him, or a domain of sorts. I think the heavenly restriction's pretty fitting, and same with him having the demon back, and it also makes it so this video isn't completely lopsided. But again, let me know what you think below. That basically leaves us with two versions of Yujiro, the one from the actual Baki verse and this JJK-ified one. The latter of which I made just for fun, but we'll be touching upon both. Because even if you just place the regular Yujiro in this verse, it's still a pretty interesting discussion. And while it's funny to treat Yujiro like Jiren or Chuck Norris, and say that he could just will himself into surviving or doing anything, we're actually going to use a somewhat conservative estimate for his power at first, seeing how it stacks up to JJK. But as you could probably tell, even that's a little bit overkill. Now onto the actual Shibuya incident itself. How well would he do? Let's place him right in the epicenter of the incident, with him being there prior to Gojo arriving. His first hurdle would be surviving the massive hordes of curses unleashed on the city. By the way, everyone we place him up against, it's not going to be ordered by power. Rather, we're basically going chronologically by who showed up in what episode. Let's assume he takes his time and doesn't stop everything right away. He lets the opponents come at him. As for all the random curses, well, that's not an issue of course. Any random transfigured human or curse that he comes across, that's not an issue. Next up, kind of out of order, is the disaster curses. Dagon, Jogo, and Hanami would probably attack first, seeing him as a threat. Let's start with Dagon. His domain and abilities are easy to counter. Yujiro casually swims in rough water for fun, and would also have no trouble with the Shikigami in there. And again, this is with the regular Yujiro. With the JJK version of him, the domain wouldn't even affect him. As for Hanami, cursed buds could be an issue for him, if they actually hit him that is. Not only could he dodge or counter them easily, but if one happens to hit him, it only works by drawing out cursed energy used from techniques, so neither version of Yujiro would be affected by this. If we take the regular Yujiro, well, he's just going to be attacking like normal, his techniques won't use cursed energy. And if we take the JJK version of him, that one actually has no cursed energy, so this wouldn't even affect him. Both versions could just use their raw power uninhibited. As for Hanami's flower field, it takes away one's will to fight. Would this even affect someone like Yujiro though? I doubt it. Now on to Jogo, who actually might be an issue for him. The only reason I say this is because Yujiro has shown no feats resisting heat to this magnitude, outside of one feat. He resisted a lightning bolt at one point. Now, the value you could place on this feat is really up to interpretation. Normal humans could survive lightning bolts too. The issue is, we don't know how long he actually took that lightning bolt for. Some people like to argue it's a prolonged period of time, but others like to argue it's just a normal lightning bolt. And to make it even more confusing, the scene isn't in the anime for some reason. It's only briefly shown in the opening of it. If it were in the anime, that at least would have given us some sort of time frame, but all we have is the panel of it. Lightning is hotter than magma. It could heat up to being hotter than the sun's surface. But when people are struck by it, lightning only strikes for about a few microseconds, aka a few millionths of a second. Many people have been struck by lightning in real life. Sometimes multiple times. It can be fatal, but a lot of times people walk away with no lasting consequences. From my research, it's less of a concern about physical issues, but rather how it affects your brain. So in terms of a durability feat, especially for someone like Yujiro, getting hit by lightning is really nothing. This feat means nothing unless the lightning is really prolonged. So if you wank this feat and say he survived it for a few seconds or something, then yeah, that should count for extreme heat resistance, but realistically, it probably doesn't count for anything. Still, it's worth mentioning. The only reason I say this is because if we're talking about the version of Yujiro that's affected by domains, Jogo's domain might actually be the biggest threat to him, assuming he doesn't have that heat resistance. As for the Yujiro with no curse energy, that's not an issue. And on top of that, Jogo's normal attack can be dodged easily. Yujiro should far outspeed him, and people have survived him in verse too. I mean, look at Maki. Even Naobito and Nanami survived it, even though they weren't as well off as Maki was. Naobito eventually succumbed to his injuries, but Nanami was actually able to even fight afterwards. It was brief, and he was weakened, but still, worth noting that he survived this. So, Yujiro has multiple ways to protect himself from Jogo's attacks, it's just that the domain might be an issue, given the fact that it's a guaranteed hit, and the domain's hot to begin with. Next, let's bring on Toji. This fight will probably be the most fun for Yujiro because the two are similar. Both are incredibly physically gifted and they're deadbeat dads. But given Yujiro's greater feats, plus the fact that his heavenly restriction might be even more overpowered than Toji, either version of Yujiro would easily win here. It would at least be interesting for Yujiro probably, just because Toji's physically gifted, but besides that, it's not really a big deal for him. Given the havoc of this fight, Megumi then summons Mahoraga. Oh yeah, Shigemo's also there too, and Yujiro instantly fodderizes him. But now onto Mahoraga. A true challenge for him. This is Mahoraga's first appearance, and it's at its weakest. But Mahoraga stands a good chance. It would simply have to adapt to Yujiro's raw strength, which should be pretty easy. He doesn't have a huge variety of different techniques. Of course, he has a huge moveset, but in the sense that it's all based on physical attacks. Like for example, if he could control fire, electricity, and water, those are 3 separate things. Mahoraga would have to adapt to them individually. But as shown with Sukuna's slashes, even if they're different attacks, if they're just fundamentally the same thing, Mahoraga can adapt to that. So yeah, Yujiro's gonna have different types of attacks, but at the end of the day, they're different iterations of martial arts, punches, kicks, things like that. So yeah, Mahoraga can adapt to Yujiro. However, that's only if it adapts to Yujiro quicker than Yujiro can kill it. Realistically, the fight would be over before Mahoraga could even adapt to this. If Yujiro takes his sweet time, then he's screwed. But he should overpower Mahoraga to the point where he could finish this quickly, and completely destroy it. Let's say 15-finger Sukuna also gets unleashed somehow. Another big threat. Mimicry, the fire arrow, forcible possession. It might pose some sort of challenge to Yujiro. Sukuna's also a master fighter after all. One way Sukuna could win is try to forcibly transfer himself to Yujiro if he so desires, but that would require him to actually want to do this, and it would require forcing Yujiro to eat his finger, which probably wouldn't work too well. And again, given the lack of his heat resistance feats, maybe the fire arrow could actually do something to him. But as for his normal attacks and even his domain, Yujiro could probably tank all of that, considering his durability that we listed at the beginning of the video, especially with the fact that this is only 15-finger Sukuna. It's not unreasonable to say that Yujiro could just walk right through that. He'd be a little cut up, but this probably wouldn't be enough to kill him. Sukuna at least has ways of lasting long in this fight and coming out on top too, but the odds are more so in Yujiro's favor here. Now on to his biggest challenge, Mahito. If Yujiro goes into the fight knowing nothing about Mahito, if Mahito makes contact with him even once, he's dead. He manipulates the soul so he completely bypasses Yujiro's durability and such. Of course, Yujiro significantly outspeeds and overpowers him, and given the fact that he could simply induce fear into people by just being around them, Mahito might even have a reaction like he did when he tried to touch Yuji's soul, where he was threatened by Sukuna. It probably wouldn't happen, but it's funny to think about this scenario. But if Yujiro knows anything about Mahito, he's fine here. And considering the scenario we set up, he might actually have some knowledge about him, because Mahito's been encountered by other people before and they know how his ability works. So Yujiro probably got this information beforehand. In this situation, it's no issue. He could throw things or attack through the air, turning it into a weapon. Dodging is easy for him when he's an analytical master, and he could possibly utilize Aiki, which is a fighting style shown in the series that lets people simply remain untouched, usually when they outclass an opponent's power. The big issue is he would have to attack Mahito's soul somehow. Mahito actually stands the best chance against him because all he needs to do is touch Yujiro once. And if it's a version of Yujiro that could be affected by a domain, then yeah, Mahito could win by simply doing that. But especially by this point in the story, and after all the fights Yujiro has been involved in, maybe he actually has adapted enough to the point where he could attack the soul. Given how quickly Yujiro grows as a fighter and can adapt to new situations, this isn't a crazy thing to assume. So this fight really depends on the circumstances. Mahito has ways to kill Yujiro, and Yujiro actually has ways to beat him too. It just really depends about the circumstances going into it. But if we're going with the scenario I mentioned at the beginning of this video, either version of Yujiro should be able to do this. He should have knowledge of Mahito's power, and more importantly, at this point he's probably adapted enough to be able to attack Mahito's soul. And now we're getting closer towards the end. Next, Uraume. This could be a toss-up. If Uraume is only focused on Yujiro and uses all of their power on him, they likely could freeze Yujiro. It's basically the inverse of what we said for Jogo, except to a higher degree because Uraume is way above that. But we don't know if he could survive something this cold. The big issue for Uraume is, just like the others, Yujiro greatly outspeeds them, and greatly overpowers them. Of course, if it's a little ice, Yujiro could break through easily. But again, if Uraume focuses all of their power on Yujiro and just completely freezes him head to toe, well, it's a little iffy if he could survive. It really depends how quickly this would happen and how cold it is. Likely, it could be another Yujiro victory, but due to Uraume's powers, they at least have some way to win, especially if they're able to completely freeze Yujiro and just break him once he's fully turned into ice. And finally, Kenjaku. He actually wouldn't be too big of an issue here, especially if we assume that Sukuna killed Mahito, which means Kenjaku doesn't have his ability. Yujiro could easily fight off all of his cursed spirits, and it really comes down to what techniques Kenjaku has to extract. This battle will be more of a battle of the minds, considering how smart both of these fighters are. In terms of raw strength, Yujiro completely outclasses him, but Kenjaku might have some sort of specific technique that he could extract, although it's tough to say if any of them would be able to stop Yujiro. His gravity manipulation is his best bet actually, and depending on the extent of that, maybe that could be used to kill Yujiro. Notably because by reversing his anti-gravity, he was able to survive a black hole. So it seems pretty powerful. Hell, he might even be interested in using Yujiro as a vessel of some sorts. And he might not even try and kill him right away. Just like some of the other fights, this one's kind of situational, but more often than not, Yujiro should win this. both the normal version of him and the JJK version of him that we made. So back to the original question. Could the Shibuya Incident stop Yujiro Hanma? Maybe? Could Yujiro Hanma stop the Shibuya Incident? Most likely, yeah. It's not a guarantee, and he will struggle against certain abilities. Plus, his goal here is to stop the incident, so other people will be there fighting and could help too. If we place him up against literally every character in this arc together, all at once, that's a different story. But he still does stand a chance against that too. A much lower chance, but still, a chance. He'd struggle mostly with the situational fights. You know, Mahito, Mahoraga. Really, it depends how quickly he adapts there and the information he has to go off of. As for Uraume and Kenjaku, they have ways to win, but it's situational. It depends how they would act. Sukuna even poses a threat too depending on how he acts, but more likely than not, Yujiro can make it through these fights. And remember, this is only using the Yujiro at the current point in the anime. We didn't even really use the demon back, and we're being relatively conservative with the estimates for his power here. There are some really absurd statements and wanks that I've seen for him, including the argument that he surpasses time or has a relevant speed. That's not even touching upon those things. But let me know what you think below. Did I miss some sort of way the incident could stop him? Does he have better chances than I outlined? Worse chances? Leave your thoughts below. And remember, I know how power scaling videos get, be civil in the comments. Anyways, thanks for watching, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in my next video.